Good morning, this is Nicole Ringgold. Check out these gorgeous ginkgo leaves. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to fabricate them in sterling silver. I start with the actual leaf or with a template that I find on stock images. So here I have the template and I'm going to print it. And then if you choose to have more than just one, you can go down, add more or less. And then you can go up and, let's try even less. And then you can go up and print. From here, I'll cut out the images. Here, note that you don't have to cut out the image perfectly and you can cut right across the stem. I use rubber cement to adhere it to my silver. You can also, like I said, use the actual leaf if it's not too crispy, like my yellow ones are because they're too dry. You'll want to use either 24 gauge sheet for earrings, if you plan on making earrings, or you can use 22 and thicker for a pendant. Once you've adhered the template to your sheet and let it dry, then you'll saw it out, and depending on the gauge silver, that's going to determine the size of your blade. Here I'm making earrings, so it's 24 gauge sheet, which means I'm using a 4/0 saw blade. You could also go with a 5/0 if you prefer. And as you can see, I'm sawing right through the stem because you won't need that. You'll peel off the paper, rub off the dried rubber cement. I have a little Smith torch. I'm starting with about 4 inches of propane. I'm adding my oxygen until I have that nice light blue flame. And then I'm going to add propane. So there's the nice light blue flame. I'm adding propane, and that gives you an annealing flame. And then I heat my pieces until when I pull away, they're nice and dark. I did create a whole tutorial on how to use the little Smith torch, so you can refer to that for additional information. And if you don't know, I anneal my silver every single time I'm soldering because it's a foolproof way of both softening the silver and cleaning it. Here I have 2 to 3 inch 16 gauge round wire, and I've got my round nose pliers, and I'm going to create kind of like a lollipop at one end of each of the pieces of wire. If you watch my barbell chain tutorial, this is exactly the same process. Wrapping the wire around the round nose pliers, making sure that the wire overlaps, and then I straighten out, I guess I call it the pin or the tail. Now I'm using flat nose pliers to ensure that when you put it down on your surface, everything is flush laying down on the surface. And for those of you who are interested, I use a Silquar, Silquar soldering platform. Starting with about 2 inches of propane, now adding my oxygen. I'm going to focus the heat on the bend in the wire, or the mass is what I call it. The most vulnerable part of this piece is the tip of the wire, and then it circles around, and then that's kind of like the armpit or the bend. That's where I'm going to put my torch. And then I'm going to use my pick to nudge the silver inward so that when the silver is at the point where it's ready to fuse, it will be touching. So again, I'm going to heat the mass. I've got my pick ready. I'm going into the bend. I'm nudging it inward to make sure it's touching, and there it fused. I'll do it again. No flux is required when you're fusing. You'll want to make sure it's nice and flat, flush on your work surface. And then I'm going to use my pick to nudge right around 11 o'clock, heating the mass or the bend, and as soon as it reaches the melting point, it will fuse as long as it's touching. I use Mighty Flux, my T-Flux. I'm fluxing the pre-annealed and pickled ginkgo leaves. I'm also going to flux the stems. Place the stems on the ginkgo leaves exactly where you want them. Since this is the only solder joint you're going to have on the ginkgo leaves, except for ear wires, you don't have to worry about solder reflowing at that point, so you can use any kind of solder. I'm using medium for color match, and I'm pick soldering. heating the mass, the sheet, and then I'm going to sweat the solder to the stem. Sweat soldering is puddling. You don't want it to just ball. So they're puddled on the stem, and now I'm turning my torch away from the stem, and I'm heating the mass. You can use your pick as a heat sink if you're worried about it. Heating the mass until the solder flows. So once again, I'm going to pick up the solder. I'm using medium solder for color match. Heating the mass, and then I'm waiting for sort of a dull yellow hue, which is solder flow point. And then I'm turning my torch to the stem, sweating the solder to the stem, and then heating the mass once again to draw the solder from the stem down to the mass. These are abrasive cutoff wheels that I get through Rio Grande. And what I do with these is, if you were to look at the silver from a side angle, you'll see that it kind of looks square, which, of course, when you look at an actual leaf, it looks more like fabric. So I use this particular tool to taper or bevel the edges of the leaf. For me, it's those fine details that make a big difference. Blending together here the leaf and the stem, and then blending the stem into the back plate. And then I'll make my way all the way around the leaf, both the front and the back. You can also do this with files or sandpaper, but this is more efficient. Then I use a black silicone disc to go over all of the areas that I shaved down with the cutoff wheel, because the cutoff wheel makes a little bit more of a rough texture, and the black silicone disc will soften that. Keep in mind there's a lot of residue that's made from the black silicone disc, so you'll want to wear a mask. Once that's finished, you can move over to, this is a set of cross-cut cylinder burrs, LYNX brand. And I would use one of the smaller in the set of 12 that's provided. It would be advisable for you to practice this technique on scrap copper because it's very easy to skid across the surface. I anchor my hand on the table so that I'm not skidding across, and I'm pulling it toward me, drawing, using the edge of the cross-cut cylinder burr, drawing toward me. Be sure to carve relatively deeply because otherwise when you go to polish, your texture may just come out. I start at the top and work my way down toward myself, fanning outward. Sometimes I create kind of like a pie shape, and then I go back and I fill that in. I carve and carve all the way out until I've fanned out to the uppermost portion of the leaf, and then turn it over and do the other side. And then once that's done, I use round nose pliers to give the leaves more dimension. If it seems that your silver is brittle, you'll want to anneal it because otherwise it could break or crack. As I'm doing this, I'm making sure that the round nose pliers are heading the same direction as the lines that I have carved, so that in case it mars the metal, you won't be able to see. Moving forward, then I use a fiber wheel. This is a fine fiber wheel, and there's the product number. I get it from Rio Grande. When you carve with the cross-cut cylinder burr, sometimes it leaves a little bit of a sharp spots, and so I use this, go in all sorts of different directions, and I use this to take down any sharp spots. And it's such a light texturing that it does not take out any of the carving that you did previously. From here, you can add a bail, or you can add ear wires. I like to do liver of sulfur and then polish that out, which brings out the accents and the shadows. And that's it. Don't hesitate to reach out with questions. And again, thank you to Rio Grande for sponsoring my channel.